Hello.
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 How are you, Professor?
I'm doing very well.
We're so excited to have you. We really are. This topic and everything that you've written about is just fascinating.
Thank you.
So now I have to say, we were obviously having a little fun with the topic, and I'm sure that you're familiar with that, with our music and our flashing lights. But I do want to start out and share, and I'm reading this right from your book so I get it right, your background, because it's incredibly impressive. And I think that's really important. I'm actually going to switch my glasses so I can read.
Those ones are just for looks.
Those are
Good
just-
looks.
Yeah.
They're fake.
They're just
Okay.
glass.
So this is Professor's background. You serve as Harvard University's Department of Astronomy, founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative, director of the Institute for Theory and Computation within the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, chair of the Breakthrough Starshot Initiative, chair of the Board on Physics and Astronomy for the National Academics. I can keep going, but I think it's pretty clear. And by the way, if people have not read this book, you got to read this book. This book is unbelievable. And part of the reason why I wanted to share your background and credibility is because, and we'll talk about that, let's face it, when it comes to UFOs, there's kind of two types of people. There's the learned, the educated, and what we're going to find out today, which is why you're here. And then there obviously are some, crackpots that, we want to differentiate between. But thank you so much. And I wanted to set that up for us. So thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. And I should say that all the labels are less important than the evidence we have in the context of what we will discuss next.
The biggest question people have, and reading everything, and we were all reading through the book and we were watching some of your other interviews, and it's all fascinating and great. So much of it is, and again, when you talk about evidence and the science, it can actually get confusing to everyday people, people who don't have even a background in astronomy, maybe went to a planetarium once as a kid. What most people want to know is, do you believe, are you saying that we may be visited by aliens? Is there a connection to that, or am I totally changing what you're saying?
Well, in science, we are never sure until we have a lot of evidence that shows us that there is only one interpretation. Most of the time in science, we just don't have enough evidence, enough clues to reach a conclusion. But what I would say is that based on what we have seen, this was the first object that visited the solar system from outside. It's sort of like something you find in your backyard that came from the street, and it looked nothing like we have seen before. On that, everyone would agree. It didn't look like a comet. It didn't look like an asteroid, and it had properties that were unprecedented. And all the natural explanations for such an object invoked something that we've never seen before. And so there is the artificial origin possibility that it was produced, manufactured by another civilization. That's the one that I suggested in my publications. And that should be left on the table as a very viable possibility, because all the other explanations have problems, and we can get into that. So what I would say as a scientist is that this is the first object we have seen from outside. And the experience is like walking on the beach. Most of the time you see rocks or seashells that were naturally produced. But every now and then you see a plastic bottle, something that looks very different. And this object did look like a plastic bottle to me.
But if it was an alien object from another universe, another solar system, would that then naturally conclude or not that there is some alien life flying it or behind it? Because would this object just exist without any life force on it or behind it or from some location that launched it?
Well, think about what we sent into space, Voyager 1, Voyager 2, or New Horizons. These were spacecraft or equipment that we sent out. And, we let it leave the solar system and go into outer space. And just like the sun formed, there were many other stars that formed before the sun. Most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun. So if they had civilizations like ours around them, they sent equipment into space billions of years ago. And by now, this equipment may not be functional anymore. It may be defunct. It's just like the plastic bottle may have holes in it, may not be useful for anything, but it serves an important purpose. It signals the existence of a technological civilization beyond us. And that's extremely important. When my daughters were young, they were at home and they thought that they are the smartest in the world and that the world centers on them. But then they left to the kindergarten and they met other kids, and that changed their perception. That was a psychological shock. If I asked them at that point whether they prefer to stay at home or go to the kindergarten, they would say home, because this way they can maintain their illusion that they are the smartest. And so a lot of people prefer, to shut down the curtains and not look through the windows and check whether we have neighbors. But we now have the technology to do that. And, the best way to decide if it's a natural object or piece of equipment is to take a photograph. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book. I wouldn't need to write the book if we had a photograph. And we can get a photograph from the next object. If we get an early enough alert, we can send a spacecraft with a camera that will come close to that object and take a close-up photo. We can even land on it, just like OSIRIS-REx. That was a mission that landed on an asteroid, Bennu. And
well, I have two volunteers I'm willing to part with, so you let us know. I know that Adrian and Dana have a bunch. I mean, everyone here is crazy excited. I mean, yeah, this is probably, I've never seen. We have people who are hanging around the set saying, "I want to say hello to the professor." We're going to roll on this in a second. But before I want to, because you touched on this in relation to your daughters, and sometimes you don't want to know what's out there, and that leads a question that we're going to touch on a lot today. And we're going to look at some video, which is very impactful. You'll speak to it. Is why does the government keep anything UFO related so secretive, so hidden? At least it seems that way. And doesn't that, in some ways, create more of a panic or a confusion or a mystery or conspiracy theories or fear than just cutting to the science? Why does the government do that?
Well, the government is worried about national security. And so the first thing they care about is whether other nations have capabilities that we do not recognize. That there are some, for espionage purposes, there are some crafts that are orbiting our space, and we are not aware of that. So that's why they first care about these unidentified flying objects. But if they can convince themselves that has nothing to do with another nation that is spying on us, then of course it becomes part of science. We want to know what these phenomena are. And in my view, the best approach would be to deploy, state-of-the-art cameras. We have now much better cameras than we had decades ago. Just put them in the places where reports came from and monitor the sky and see if we see anything unusual. It's just like a scientific experiment. We can look for the evidence. There is this biblical story, about Abraham in the Old Testament that heard the voice of God telling him to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. And if Abraham had a cell phone with a voice memo up, he could have pressed the button and recorded the conversation with God, and we would all believe it. But he didn't have a phone and a cell phone, and so we don't know. We have to decide whether we believe the story or not. So the same is true with the stories that we hear from pilots. I think it would be best for us to reproduce the results, to gain confidence by placing cameras in places and checking if anything unusual is happening.
So why doesn't the government do that? I mean, if it's that simple and we have the technology.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to lead such an experiment scientifically. If someone were to fund it, I think it's worthwhile. Yeah, rather than relying on eyewitness testimonies, and pilots don't have the best equipment on board to record these things. And the same is true about people on ships that reported it. I mean, it's mostly military service people that reported it. I think we should make a scientific experiment out of it and just check. Yeah, but most people ridicule it, just ignore it. And then the government keeps it close to the chest because they want to check if there is anything related to national security there. I think, in principle, we can have a completely open experiment where nothing is hidden, everything is open to the public, and we just deploy the best cameras we have at those locations.
Let me see what my two little aliens here want to chime in with, because they're gonna send me to another planet if I don't turn it over to them here.
Well, I just want to go back because we were talking about the foreign object before, but we didn't say what it was, and it was Oumuamua. Is that how you say it?
Oumuamua, yes.
Oumuamua.
It means a scout in the Hawaiian language, because the telescope that discovered it was on Maui, Mount Haleakala in Maui.
And I was curious about this because I think in your book you mentioned that this area in Hawaii has been known for other UFOs or other foreign objects, or is this the first one that's appeared in that area?
That was the first one discovered scientifically using a telescope, looking at the sky. You know, we are using the sun as a lamppost that illuminates the darkness of space. So whenever an object passes close enough to the sun, we can see it if it's big enough. This one was the size of a football field, and it was tumbling every 8 hours. And it had a very extreme shape because the amount of sunlight that it reflected changed by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling every 8 hours. It also had a flat shape, a pancake-like shape, which we infer from the reflected light. And then it was also pushed away from the sun by some force. And the simplest explanation for that is the reflection of sunlight that gave it a push. But for that, it needed to be very thin, sort of like a sail. And nature doesn't make sails. That's why I suggested that maybe it's artificial in origin.
You guys want to show a couple of the clips of the video and let the professor speak to them?
Sure, if you want.
So these are things that you've seen, I'm sure, because they've been on the news, but we wanted to ask you and let you speak to them. Like, what's happening here? So we'll cue up the first one. Can
you see the screen, doctor or professor? So sorry.
Yeah, I can.
I'm sure he's got a doctorate or something. The guy's a genius.
Don't worry about it. I'm a farm boy, basically. I was born on a farm. Yeah.
A kibbutz, I'm guessing.
Oh, wow.
So you've seen this before, and this was, we want to say, Jeremy Corbell was the one who broke this footage. So we want to make sure we put credit to that. And I know it's been on the news, but so what do we make of that? Well, it has to be something.
We don't know. Yeah, right. So I think we should just get better evidence, you know, and things like that, if they exist, we should be able to capture them with much better resolution, you know, because we have much better cameras than the one used for this purpose.
And this footage had to be leaked. I mean, he says in his piece that, you know, this was leaked to him from, I think it was the Defense Department, someone he knew somewhere. I mean, like, why would the government or any agency hold on to this and not let
they would hold on if it's a matter of national security and they want to figure out whether another nation is spying on us. I mean, that's the only reason I can see.
That's a very bad job of spying, by the way. Yeah. I mean, that would be like
obvious.
That might be like some like tiny little nation wedged in between a couple of villages in the middle of the African continent somewhere and run by 3 people. If that's like the idea of like how to sneak up on someone to light up the sky like the 4th of July.
But my point is simple. We don't need to rely on the government. We can do the experiment ourselves. We can just deploy. I mean, this experiment would cost maybe at most, you know, a few million or tens of millions of dollars, and that's something that
we got Bitcoin, baby. We talking about Bitcoin.
True.
Come on,
a sufficiently wealthy individual can fund it, and instead of us talking about it, we'll have much better data. You know, so I think it's worth, instead of believing testimonies or looking at fuzzy images, let's just produce much better images and see for ourselves, you know.
Well, here's one. I'm sorry, go ahead, Adrian.
I was just going to say, Professor, do you just feel like we as a civilization are just completely ignorant to not think that there's another species or life form out there? What is your opinion on it?
Yeah, I think so. I think we are very self-centered. If you look at human history, you know, there was the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle that argued that we are at the center of the world. And for 1,000 years, people believed him because it flattered their ego. And then Copernicus and Galileo realized, no, it looks like the earth is moving around the sun. And Galileo was put in house arrest. The philosophers at the time didn't want to look through his telescope, but it didn't change reality. Reality doesn't care whether we ignore it or not. The earth continued to move around the sun. And then people thought maybe, you know, the Earth-Sun system is very special. You don't have planets like that around other stars. And then now we know that about half of the sun-like stars have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. So what we find in our backyard, is not special. We're not privileged in any way, but still people think, oh, maybe we are the only ones. I don't think so. I mean, as a matter of modesty, I think we should assume that things like us existed in the past and also exist right now, and we should just search for them. And we can do it. So I completely agree with you. I think, we behave very often just like a caveman. If you present a cell phone to a caveman, the caveman is used to playing with rocks all of his life. He would regard the cell phone as a shiny rock. So we are not really, if you are not open to find wonderful things, you will never discover them.
Very true.
Good point. Let's pull up that footage because it was from the aircraft carrier Nimitz. And you mentioned military personnel, a lot of spottings. Obviously, they're out at sea. They're in the fighter planes doing surveillance. But what's fascinating about this is we're talking about a U.S. aircraft carrier, billions and billions in the most state-of-the-art technology. The people, the captains, the commanders of these ships, and the pilots, these people go through endless amounts of training. I mean, these are not like someone who worked for Uber for a few weeks, got laid off, and is now saying, I see a UFO, and we're all jumping on it. So let's watch this, and let's listen to the voice of the pilot on this. It's really fascinating.
Oh, that's no, is it? It's not. It is on us, dude. Well, if there's like anything, have a look on the
In 2015, pilots flying off the east coast of America spotted this.
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
Again, its speed and movement apparently astounding experienced air crew.
That is on us, dude. Well, if there's like anything, it's rotating.
So crazy.
I mean, what is your take on that? You've seen that before, I take it.
Yeah, it's very intriguing. I think we need more data. Rather than ignore it or ridicule it, or I think we should just collect more information about things like it and try to figure out what they are. Science should work based on evidence, and the fact that you can reproduce it, you can try and get it again. And we should not be guided by prejudice. A lot of people have an opinion. They think they know the answer in advance. But science is a learning experience. We try to figure out what is out there. We shouldn't assume that we know it in advance. That's what the philosophers thought in the days of Galileo. They said, we know that the sun moves around the earth. We know that the earth is at the center. So that's the wrong attitude. And we saw it over and over again along human history that, people, because of prejudice, missed opportunities to discover new things. So we are now at the 21st century. I think we should have learned the lesson by now. And if there is something intriguing and that looks really strange, we should, rather than ignore it, we should double down on the evidence. We should get more evidence, much better evidence, and figure it out. Even if it's a natural phenomena, it would be nice to know what it is.
What spoke to me on that was when you listen to the pilots' voices, like you hear it in their voices. And it wasn't even fear per se. It was shock, fascination, awe. And again, these are not people who said today, I'm going to learn to fly. I mean, they've been through some pretty serious training and they're up there. And you can't fake that. You can't.
What I wanted to say is that, when you see something anomalous, something that doesn't quite line up with what you expected, it's worth doubling down. Life could be exciting. Why make it boring? Why always say, I don't care about it? People think that it's a sign of maturity to ignore unusual phenomena. But actually, I'm very much like a kid. I really want to figure out things that look unusual. That's what makes life fun and worth living. Why ignore these things and ridicule any discussion about them?
Yeah.
So we're going to have a little game here in a second, and it's a very serious topic, but because I know we all agree, we're with you that, spend more money, get more research, and prove it. So there's no doubt about that. But we're going to have to push it a little bit further and just find out what you really feel inside, just your opinion. And we have a specialist in the game of yes or no. That's Dana. And she has these rules. She makes up these games. I mean, and it's like, all you can say is yes or no. And, sometimes you're like, but so anyway, if you have a couple of those for the professor, why don't we kind of
Do
cut
we
to the
want?
chase and
Do
see
we
what-
want to cut to this, or Dana has an alien story?
Well, that we know. but-
Oh, okay.
You don't know it.
I'm on pins
No,
and needles.
I
I've
thought
been
we-
waiting
we-
all
okay.
day to hear her alien
We'll
story.
do the yes or no afterwards, but that is true. There was a rumor that you have a story to share, and we'll let you tell it to the professor as well.
I do have a story, and I shared it when I was younger, but it's something I don't really share often, and it makes me feel strange to retell it as an adult, but I'm positive of what I saw when I was younger, whether it's an alien or just something else strange. But I grew up on a farm as well in New Jersey, and I used to have four-wheelers, ATVs, and me and two of my girlfriends, they were both on the back of me, were riding our four-wheeler on the farm like we did every single weekend. And one weekend, all three of us saw this like speck, this object in the sky, and then a ring formed around it and it disappeared and it just reappeared over here. And it did that a few times and it bounced around. I mean, I saw it for a good couple of minutes. We could stare at it and then a ring would form like a halo and it would just disappear and reappear somewhere else. And we freaked out, rode the four-wheeler home, rode up the hill to my house to tell my mom, and she walked out just to greet us, not knowing what was going on. And she looks behind us in the sky and goes, "Look at that." And we turn around and this thing just like goes up and disappears. So that's my story. Me, my two girlfriends, and my mother all saw that. And
So curious.
yes, I don't know what that was.
No, you're not alone, because I gave a lecture at the Technion. It's a university in Israel, and just a week ago, and one of the most distinguished professors, a department chair there, wrote to me afterwards. He said that he had an experience as a younger person and saw something quite unusual, and when he tried to tell it to his colleagues, they completely dismissed it, but he was absolutely sure that there was something unusual happening. And the problem is people are not willing to consider it seriously. And that's the problem, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell yourself there is nothing to look for, then you don't find it. It's sort of like stepping on the grass and saying, look, the grass doesn't grow. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're not willing to look, you're not willing to check, and therefore you don't find anything.
But you've mentioned that before in your book and some of your other lectures. You've said that in your role that you've taken a lot of flack, for lack of a better word, from the professional community, the scientific community, who've given you some pushback, the way that you speak out and want to push that envelope and say, hey, we may not be seeing everything here. Look at this, look at that. Why do you think that is, that professionals, educated, highly educated people, I mean, again, you're a very educated, high up man at Harvard. You obviously have some background in what you're talking about.
Right. And so they don't want to move away from their comfort zone. And, there was a lecture about this object, Oumuamua, at Harvard. And when I left the room together with a colleague of mine that worked on rocks for decades, he said, this object is so weird, I wish it never existed. And to me, that illustrates the mentality. People are not willing to take any risks. They prefer that everything they see looks like something that they expected. They are not willing to entertain something new outside the box, a new way of thinking about objects. And so that's very nice. And on top of that, you have the resistance to the idea of another kid on the block that may be even smarter than we are. So that's because it hurts the ego of many people. Just like with my daughters, there is a resistance to the notion that we are perhaps we have neighbors that are smarter than we are. And you combine these two things, and also the fact that many people in academia prefer to feel elevated relative to the public, so they don't want to even have any connection to discussions about unidentified flying objects.
They're snobs.
Yeah,
it's a nice way of saying it.
No, but my point is what, for example, I was working on, and what is described in my book Extraterrestrial, is addressing evidence that was collected using the standard scientific method, just using telescopes. It's not pilots reporting about what they saw, but it's not citizens just saying, I saw something unusual. It's well-documented evidence that looks anomalous, that looks nothing like we have seen before. And so you ask yourself, okay, well, if anyone that tries to explain this evidence comes up with something we've never seen before, like a hydrogen iceberg, a nitrogen iceberg, a cloud of dust particles, these are the kind of suggestions that the mainstream scientists try to explain away this object as a natural object, and all of them have problems, then, obviously it makes sense to consider an out-of-the-box explanation such as an artificial origin. And I just don't understand the response of the community. And, there was...
give us the name of the top 2 snobs. We're going to pay them a visit afterwards. Like who's really they're going to get a special visit from a flying object.
I don't view it as a personal thing.
We got friends in the Navy SEALs. Don't worry. We're going to put some calls out. They're going to get a visit from some...
A lot of people attack me personally, but I, just like basketball coaches, I prefer to tell my team members to focus on the ball, not on the audience, focus on the evidence. And people attack me personally. I served in the military at a young age, and I remember people saying that sometimes a soldier has to put his body on the barbed wire so that other soldiers will pass through. And the way I see it is, I'm willing to suffer the pain, as long as this subject will enter into the mainstream of the scientific community at some point. And I just don't understand why there is so much reluctance. Because if you go back in time, there used to be people that said, oh, the human body has a soul, and therefore it shouldn't be dissected. We shouldn't have operations, and anatomy should be forbidden. Imagine if scientists would say, oh, this is a controversial subject, whether the human body has a soul or not, therefore we don't want to deal with it. Where would modern medicine be?
Well,
My point is, science has an obligation to address a subject of interest to the public and clarify it using the scientific method.
You bring up such an interesting point that it is universal, even well beyond the field you're talking about. And we've spoken about it before on topics of medicine and the scientific community. And we've worked with a lot of breakthrough pioneers in the medical world on the forefront of Alzheimer's research and other types of medical solutions. And what we hear repeatedly from people like yourself, who are really at the pinnacle of breaking through and opening up things that everybody else said this can't be, is that repeatedly the problem is when a pioneer breaks through, like yourself or some of these other medical pioneers, think of Salk and think of Pasteur, Louis Pasteur. When these things happen, the problem for everybody else, and many of these people are snobs or pompous, and they've spent their entire lives studying and studying, but they lose focus that they're studying to make the world better, lives better. And they start studying to advance, and ultimately they're advancing their own ego. And what that means to a lot of these people, Professor, is if you're proven right in their mind, they've been wrong or they didn't figure it out. So they're wrong instead of being part of the solution. And we see it, and we're talking recently to a doctor, and he says, think of it, medical students are taught that this is the way to do it, the only way to do it, it has to be. And he goes, and I say to medical students, 100 years ago, they were using leeches on people to draw blood. We used to dig holes in people's cranium to relieve pressure and things like that. Look what we've learned. Look what we didn't know, what is possible. So I think what you're speaking to is such a massive issue. And really, I was being funny before when I said snobs, but the reality is there is this pompous, egotistical level that really reeks through the highest levels of academia.
You are exactly on target here, and I discuss it in my book. And I think people in academia are guided more by trying to amplify their image, to show that they are smart, that they are never wrong, and rather than guided by evidence and willing to take risks and innovate. I was asked by the Harvard Gazette, the official newspaper of Harvard University, what is the one thing I would like to change in the world? And I said, I would like my colleagues to behave more like kids, because kids learn about the world by willing to take risks. They bump into objects, they put skin in the game, they are willing to make mistakes, and they're open-minded. They don't worry so much about themselves. And something bad happens when these kids become adults and become professors in academia. They start to get attached to themselves and their image. And just when they get tenure so that they have job security and they can take risks, at that point, they start worrying only about their image and they don't take any risks. And not only that, but they ridicule any proposal that is, out of the box.
Mhm.
So I completely agree with you.
Such a life lesson.
Yeah.
That's important.
I have a question.
Yes.
Have you ever experienced anything through your personal eyes or experience?
No.
Do
Is-
you want to?
Yeah.
Would you welcome it?
Yes, I mean, I asked my students in class actually whether if there was a spaceship coming over and they were to invite the students to go on board, would they do it? And all of the students said yes, under one condition, that they'll be able to share the experience on social media with their friends. I mean, I don't care less about this. So I don't care how many likes I have on Twitter, or I don't have any account on social media. But for some reason, the students cared a lot about sharing the experience.
It's interesting because one of my childhood memories is the movie E.T. And the reason why is, to this day, it's the only movie in the history of my life that I cried in. Now, granted, I think I was like 9 or 10 or something. And I cried my eyes out, man. I was wrecked.
I met Steven Spielberg when he got a honorary degree at Harvard a few years ago, and I told him about my research, and he said, "If you ever find evidence for aliens, let me be the first one to know. Just contact."
That's awesome.
And I think Steven watches this podcast
Yeah,
religiously.
I'm sure he does.
I'm pretty sure he's probably trying to call in
Call
right
us,
now.
Steven.
Which is cool on that. But the thing that always resonated with me, and we had close encounters of the third kind. These guys were too young. I was asking about yesterday, and I got the blank stare. I'm like, okay, that was an opportunity to make fun of me for being older. So I moved on quickly. But we remember
there was a re-screening of it last year. I saw it again.
I mean, that started
okay.
it all. Close Encounters was like groundbreaking and everything.
By the way, it was groundbreaking back then, but when I saw it last year, it's like nowadays films are so much better.
It was like a black and white
well.
classic. but it's funny what your opinion is of stuff, because for me, I never had a fear of like aliens or space things, and I understand what we don't know and how the government has to worry about different things. But I wonder like how your perception is shaped, and not to say that in my mind, if an alien showed up, it would be sweet and friendly like ET was and everything. But I think it depends on your mindset and perception. Like my natural assumption is that like if I go to another country, we were filming in Mexico City last week. My natural assumption is that someone's going to be friendly and nice and welcoming until they're not, and then you deal with it then. So I don't have this fear or this thing that aliens are going to come down and laser beam us and zap us, just like if we get to Mars, in Elon Musk's new Tesla or wherever else we go out in space, our intention, would be good, or hopefully not what we did to the Native American Indians. Maybe it's bad news for wherever we land based on our history. But anyway, there's that. I wonder what your perception is from the movies and things like that shapes. Like, what about you guys? Like, do you think of aliens as bad, or do you think of them like from the Flintstones when they visit Fred Flintstone and they get along?
Why does it have to be bad or good? I mean,
okay, Adrian.
Really,
over to
no.
you. We just cannot.
It doesn't have to be bad or good.
We can't play this no opinion game. People like watch to see and listen, like what people actually
I have
think.
many opinions. It's similar to what you said about you wish your colleagues would be more like children. Children see the world as huge. Everyone's bigger than them. They have so much to learn. And when people become adults, they're larger than life. They're on top of the world. They have it all. They don't want to think that there's anything bigger than them out there.
Right.
I think it's naive to think that if we are humans on this planet, that there's not something else anywhere out there.
Well, see, that's an opinion. See, that
right.
helps.
I'm very opinionated.
But
I was getting there.
But one thing you should keep in mind is when you go in the wilderness, it's a very good advice to stay quiet and listen rather than speak out, because you never know whether there are predators out there. And I think the first thing we would find is probably a piece of equipment, because living creatures, have a hard time surviving over long journeys, and using the standard rockets that we use to travel to the nearest star would take us 50,000 years. So trips between stars take a long time, and it's much easier for equipment to survive that trip. And so that's why I think, if we ever meet something, it will be a very advanced technology, maybe functional, maybe not, we don't know. But at any event, it would look very unusual to us, because and also, of course, if we ever go to a place and look at the creatures, they would look extremely unusual to us, because when you go to meet another person, you can pretty much assume that the person would have a nose, eyes, ears, just like you do, because we share common heritage genetically. We have the same genetic heritage. But if you meet life from another planet that had no connection with Earth, no contact, then it could be really strange. Most of the stars are much smaller than the sun, and they emit infrared light. So any creature living next to them would need infrared eyes. And I asked my students, do you know of any creature on Earth that has infrared eyes? And one of them, she found an image of a shrimp that has infrared eyes. They look like ping pong balls connected with cords to the head of the shrimp. And it did look like an alien to me. Another thing to keep in mind is, we are born into this world like actors being put on a stage, okay? And without a script. We don't know what the play is about. And then the first thing to notice is the stage is huge. If you look at the universe at large, it's 10 to the power 26, one with 26 zeros afterwards. Bigger than the size of our body. The universe is huge, so the stage is huge. We're suddenly not at the center of the stage. The play is not about us, because we are living for 100 years. That's one part in 100 million of the age of the universe. So the play has been going around for a very long time, and we just joined it. It's not about us. We need to figure out what is the meaning of our life. And the first thing to check is whether there are other actors out there. That's a very simple thing that you immediately want to know. If there are other actors, maybe they know what the play is about. To me, it sounds really strange that people just focus on the piece of the stage just around them and assume that they are at the center of this play. And that makes no sense whatsoever.
What about the possibility? And I am thinking about a movie that is near and dear to my heart. And I don't mean this as a joke at all, but it's a serious question. But I'm reminded of Coneheads. What do you think, Professor, about the possibility of aliens living among us? And maybe they're so intelligent that they have learned our ways, they've learned our culture, they've learned how to maybe camouflage their looks, and they're hidden among
blonde
us.
hair.
All I can tell you is that my wife says that sometimes I look as an alien to her, and she says, if they ever land to get you back, ever land in our backyard with a spacecraft, with a spaceship, I want you to do two things. First, make sure that you leave the car keys with me. And second, please ask them not to ruin the lawn in the backyard when they lift off. So, of course, some of us may look alien to others, but we don't have clear evidence for that.
I feel like that's more of a possibility. This is just my personal opinion, but I feel like that's more of a possibility than I think what Elon Musk recently said about like the simulation and that whole thing, which is very curious to me. But
Elon's got some good drugs. We got to get a hold of Elon.
Exactly. No, that's exactly my point. First, only someone that has so much cash in the bank can say maybe reality is a simulation. If you have to earn your living, you really need to pay attention to reality. You can't just. And second, it really reminds me of the kind of hallucination that you get when you are on drugs, because we can all feel very good about ourselves and say that we are as wealthy as Elon Musk, and the only way to find out would be to go to the bank. And if we do go to the bank, we will find that we cannot cash that amount, and therefore, that will be a reality check. So feeling that we are in a simulation makes little sense to a person that has to deal with reality on a daily basis. And, it's sort of like being on drugs. And I just find it really strange that people advocate for that, because in a way it's irresponsible. You can become lazy, you can become inattentive. You don't.
I wonder if the guys on his assembly lines, guys and gals who are making 60, 70 grand a year, working nonstop, doing very, very difficult work, I wonder if they feel that they're living in the joy of a simulation. I mean, that's such a billionaire statement beyond.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's so true.
Well, it's not only a million. I mean, the problem with this statement is that the learning experience for me as a scientist is always about a dialogue with nature. I want to listen to nature. I jog every morning at 5 a.m. and in the company of ducks, birds, wild turkeys, and rabbits. And I enjoy listening to nature, paying attention to nature. The sunrise is different every morning. And the same way when I'm doing my work as a scientist, I pay attention to the evidence. I pay attention to nature. So believing that there is a reality out there from which I can learn is really fundamental. Saying, everything is a simulation is as if you pretend that it's not real, that you don't really need to worry about it.
Then there's no consequence. So why wouldn't you go out in theory if it's a simulation and, then getting into a religious aspect, there's no heaven and hell because if it's a simulation, you're not. So why not just shoot someone who you don't like? There's no consequence.
Exactly.
Why not just take what you want from someone because
that's very dangerous. Exactly.
It's absurd. It's fundamentally absurd.
It's absurd and irresponsible to advocate for that because then you get people that are not really attentive to evidence, to data, to information they get from reality, and that's why we've not let him on the podcast. Just so you know, I mean,
he's been asking.
I keep sending him the voicemail, like stop bothering me. Make a car that works, and let's get on with this.
He's supposed to be on Saturday Night Live.
There's a lot of controversy about that. The cast is not happy about it. But look, I give the guy a lot of credit. I'm not bagging on him. I'm only commenting on the simulation.
Well, if it's a part of a simulation, perhaps there will be a bug, and he will not appear on Saturday Night.
While we're on the topic of Elon Musk, what are your thoughts, Professor, on Mars and expanding to Mars and the growth of our civilization through Mars?
That I think is a good idea of Elon and the others, not only him, but Jeff Bezos has that ambition and NASA. So I do think that currently all our eggs are in one basket, here on Earth. And that is a risk because if any catastrophe happens on Earth, we lose everything that we care about. And it reminds me of this story about Noah's Ark, the biblical story where Noah was worried about the great flood. And therefore, he built an ark so that he can preserve animals. He put animals in the ark that they would survive the flood. And so we can have a spacecraft that carries things that we care about to other places, sort of duplicating what we care about in multiple locations so that a single point catastrophe will not destroy everything we care about. Right. And I call it Noah's spaceship, carrying things elsewhere.
The government keeps seeds of every living, grown, known species. You obviously know that. It's not a secret, but for every type of food, everything that is growable, there's this vault, right? That is, I think it's a global program, isn't it?
Right.
It's not just
we should carry it beyond Earth. That's my point. The dinosaurs, they were very proud of themselves. They thought that they were quite arrogant. They thought that they are superior to any other animals. And they ate grass and enjoyed their life. And then 66 million years ago, there was this giant rock the size of Manhattan Island that hit the ground and tarnished their ego trip abruptly and destroyed 3/4 of all life forms on Earth. So, we should always worry about catastrophes like that. And if we spread our eggs in multiple baskets, then we will be protected. It's just like the Gutenberg printing press, produced multiple copies of the Bible. Previously, it was handwritten and every copy was precious. But once you have multiple copies, you don't worry about if something bad happens, if one of the copies gets damaged, you have others.
I was going to say this earlier, but then I didn't think it was relevant. But you're hitting on this same theme. And it just so much reminds me of when I was graduating high school, the superintendent of the district, very, very smart man, very interesting. And I remember the one thing I remember from graduation, I think we had a couple too many graduation beers the night before, but the one thing that always stood with me that he said when he was talking to the senior class about, don't be narrow-minded, be open-minded and realize you're young and how much the world is to change. And then he gave this example. He said, if you were living during Roman times when they had the 10,000-year empire, he goes, think of it. If you were a Roman citizen, whether you want to call it the arrogance, the confidence, the comfort, whatever it was, you could not comprehend. I mean, this was a regime that was around for 10,000 years. And then he said at the time, now, how long has the United States been around? How many people in this audience right now, 30 years, can fathom the world without either the United States, or that it would be a different map or a different setup or something? Now go back 10,000 years and think, well, they thought they were the strongest military power beyond. They had the catapult, and they had more ships with sails and more, they had fire on their catapults, and they had oil, hot oil they can throw down on, and they had the best spears. And they lasted 10. So if you were in that window, you could not comprehend. It's almost like Future Shock from Isaac Asimov, the book that I'm sure it's a lot of the things that you're speaking about that we can't comprehend now what the future looks like without going into some type of a shock. And now you think today, well, of course we can't go anywhere. We have the nuclear weapon, so does everyone else. We can't go anywhere because we're so strong, we're so powerful, we have all of these systems and everything. Well, what about, we've been around a couple hundred years, the exact math from 1776
that's exactly right.
So
yeah, and by the way, I was asked a week ago. I gave a lecture to alumni of Harvard University, and they asked me how much longer do I think our civilization would last. And I told them, when you ask yourself, suppose you pick a random time in your life, what's the chance that you are picking the first day of your life, after birth? It's very small, because the chance of you being in the first day after birth is tens of thousands of times smaller than finding yourself as an adult, because there are tens of thousands of days in the life of an adult. So most of the time you will find yourself an adult rather than a newly born infant. And in the same way, if you think, okay, we are now in our technological adulthood, we started a century ago, that means that we have another century, maybe 2 centuries, and that's pretty much it. We don't have millions of years ahead of us, because that would be tens of thousands of times longer than the century that we lived as a technological civilization. So that's a very gloomy forecast, saying, oh, we just have a few more centuries to live. We are changing the planet, we are doing things, and we won't survive much longer. But I personally believe in the human spirit. I think that we can be an outlier in the statistical distribution. We can, change all the odds, defy all odds, and just try to survive much longer than expected. And that's my hope, at least, that we will be smart enough to survive much longer. And I wrote this book, and I'm going through personal attacks and all kinds of other issues. But to me, the questions that I'm dealing with are much more important than my personal experience. These are questions about the future of humanity.
Yeah.
You should redo the cover and just have an alien with the middle finger, just something that really makes your point more. Our chief science officer, and that's not her actual title, but Maggie Nakashin will beat me senseless if I don't ask you 2 or 3 of her very specific. She emailed them to me twice. She texted them to me, and
we'll have her pop by too. She's a big fan. She's going to want to say hi to you.
Big fan. So one of them is time travel. Is time travel possible? Yes or no?
No, according to what we understand in physics right now. In fact, there are some physicists that argue that we should establish a rule that time travel is never possible, because otherwise you get logical inconsistencies. For example, you can go back in time and kill your parents, and then how is it possible that you exist so that you can do this?
Right, you'd have to have parallel universes happening at the same time, just in different stages.
Yeah, so it gets complicated, but at the moment we don't have, the current theory of space and time is that of Albert Einstein, that is about 100 years old and 105 years old. And according to that theory, there was no solution of the equations that Einstein put forward that allows for a time machine. So we just cannot imagine it.
But can Elon Musk simulate his way through time? That is
I'm sure if he gets high enough, yes.
Right before earning, right after before earning, so he can come up with a new number, and then after earnings. So, Okay. So the other question, and I think you just touched on it, is multi-universe. And I think you basically just said that you're not, but I'll let you answer. It's an exact question I was supposed to ask is, can multi-universes exist?
Oh, in principle, they can. My problem with that idea, again, just like the simulation idea, is that we cannot easily test it. So far, there was no test. So you put out an idea. Now, to me, it's similar to what Bernie Madoff did. He put out an idea. He said, you give me your money and I'll make more. Okay, irrespective of what the stock market is doing. So a lot of people thought, that's a beautiful idea. Let me, we'll give him money. And of course, that worked very well. Everyone was happy until they asked for their money back. Okay, at that point, it became clear that he cannot give people more money than they gave him because the stock market didn't do well at all times.
Well, he didn't invest it. He didn't do it.
So once the experiment was done, and he was proven wrong, and his idea did not work out, it's called a Ponzi scheme. Yeah. He was put in jail. Now, my point is, the basic point is, you need to test ideas. It's not enough to propose an idea that looks beautiful and appealing. You have to test it. And it's just not just a nuance saying, oh yeah, there is this detail I have to test. Okay, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it in 100 years. As some string theorists argue, okay, we'll do it in 100 years. We are not in a rush. The point is, it's really essential for us to believe an idea, for it to get traction, for us to pay attention to it. It needs to have some evidence that supports it, because there are so many, the range of possible beautiful ideas is huge. There are so many beautiful ideas that we can believe in that have nothing to do with reality. So the only way for us to be guided in the right direction would be to have some evidence to support ideas that look beautiful.
You remember
the multiverse is one of them.
You brought up the Bernie Madoff analogy, and it just popped into my head. I remember, it must be one of the late night comedians, and it was the funniest thing I ever heard, especially in a tragic situation, because he was a crook. He never invested in any of it. Right. And he goes,
by the way, Ponzi was before him, and Ponzi lived not far from where
he was a real guy. His name was Ponzi. Yeah. That's what people, right?
Yeah. And he lived not far from where and he started it first. He proposed to people that they give him his money, and he ended up similarly.
Yeah.
In jail. Yeah.
So the guy goes, these were really smart people, big money investors, everything else. He goes, but on top of it, he goes, the guy's name is Madoff. He goes, you're giving all of your money to a guy whose name is Madoff. He goes, that wasn't a sign from God, man. People are like, oh, God, why did you let that happen? And then God's got to be like, what part of the clue did you not see, man?
That's a good one. I've never thought about that.
He just died, by the way, in prison recently as well. I don't know how we got onto that. Okay, she's only getting one more question because she's 0 for 2 so far, Maggie. She's bringing
one more, and then Dana's rapid fire.
So you're pretty well known for not being a huge fan of some of the sci-fi out there. Is there a specific sci-fi movie or book, a lot of the successful books become movies, that you actually think, did a better job than most, or is at least somewhat on the right trail?
Yes, Arrival. I enjoyed it very much, and I actually was asked.
Arrival.
Oh, that is a good one. That was good.
Because, it doesn't make mistakes in terms of the storylines, in terms of physics, and it deals with the very important philosophical questions of how to communicate with a foreign and alien culture. That it's not just a question of language, it's the question of the means of communicating. And in the film they use some kind of an ink to communicate, and that's fascinating. I love this movie. I was asked to give a public lecture a few years ago in Brookline, and at a movie theater, and they asked me, which film do you want to show afterwards, and I selected Arrival. And it so happens that a week ago I speak over the internet with a producer, and he tells me I was the producer of Arrival, and he says, I loved your book. And I had to tell him, look, I actually loved your work before you loved my book. It was really very interesting that he said that they did a lot of research and they looked into the science. So that's an example of a very good film that I enjoyed.
So we're going to based on that, do like our going around, and each of us, I guess, will get 2 yes or no questions. Is that good? Or you want to do?
So just to clarify, they're actually rapid fire questions, Professor, so they're not yes or no, but they're like 1 to 2 word answers. Just the first thing that comes to your mind.
Then let's let Dana do the whole thing. Then, if it's just
Please,
a
go ahead.
rapid.
No,
Okay,
no.
we're gonna-
I was just introing.
Yeah,
it.
no, I'm thinking that's better that way. I didn't realize that we were doing like that. That works. Do you want to? That way she can get in a rhythm.
Thank you, leader.
She's
I
li-
know.
Anything else you
We're
want to
good.
direct?
We're good.
Well, think of it as a jazz concert.
Oh, there you go. Yes.
But I don't know where they are. I don't have the questions. That's what I'm trying to
Make
say.
them up.
Oh, they're not pre-written.
I'll start.
Okay.
Do you think, in your opinion, an alien abduction has ever occurred,
No,
either physically or?
no.
Okay.
I don't think we're interesting enough to be abducted.
Do you believe in ghosts or paranormal activity?
No,
Do you think Eisenhower met with an alien?
no.
You don't have to ask.
I mean, maybe an immigrant from another country, but not a real alien.
you know the story behind that. Obviously, I'm sure people have read
Yes.
about. Right? Okay.
Do you find the term alien a little like degrading?
No, not at all. It's just someone from another planet, another place outside the solar system.
If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Probably Socrates. And let me just explain in one sentence. He was blamed at corrupting the youth because he promoted the free dialogue, open-minded discussions, and he was put in jail and asked to drink poison and did that. And nowadays, they don't ask you to drink poison, but they tweet about you, and they can tweet nasty things about you. So that's the substitute to if Socrates would have lived today, he would be tweeted about.
Area 51. What comes to mind?
No, I don't think. I do think maybe it's espionage.
You do. And that's why the government is so secretive and so closed off. Something
Yeah.
to that. One more each. Let's do one more.
Okay. In your opinion, are aliens real?
Yes. I think we're not special. Aliens existed probably in the past. Many of these cultures are dead by now. But definitely, we are just like ants on a sidewalk. We're nothing special. And that's why nobody cares about us.
Who do you think is the most influential person in our time when it comes to this topic of aliens, UFOs?
Well, Carl Sagan was perhaps the most visionary person in this context, but he didn't pursue the science as far as he could have. He was more of a publicizer of, he was publicizing science rather than pursuing it. Yeah.
Will you commit right here and now to making sure at least 2 of my 4 kids get into Harvard?
Well, as you know,
I'm only asking for half. I'm not being greedy, Professor.
as long as you don't offer me money.
Good answer.
I'd rather do it for free. Anyone have a fine? I mean, I know we have a time limit, and you've been gracious with your time. I mean, we could go on for
one other
years.
strange question. Of the people who have submitted that they've seen something or felt something or observed something, is there a part of the world or a time of the day that it's been more likely? Is there any data on that or not at this time?
No, I don't think so. I mean, of course, there would be times of the day where it's easier for us to notice unusual phenomena because, when the sun shines very brightly, you can't see objects as easily on the sky. So, but on the other hand, with radars, you can see objects irrespective whether it's day or night. And it really depends on the equipment you're using. And I think we should do an experiment and just deploy the very best cameras, the very best audio sensors in those places where the reports came from and reproduce them and figure out whether they're real or not, whether there are unusual things there, just with our eyes open and with this subject being open to everyone to witness, rather than worry about classified reports.
What's fascinating too is when you said earlier that it's a couple of $1 million. You're literally talking about, in the scope from a national perspective, a Tomahawk missile, a couple of Tomahawks, at what each of those cost. And I'm not minimizing, the need for national defense. I'm just saying it can't be that hard if there was a remote desire to do what you're saying. Makes perfect sense. Nobody's asking us. And Elon Musk is no longer speaking to us.
It's a matter of priority. And I think the reason it's not done is because a lot of people ridicule the subject. And at the same time, those that advocate for it do not have money or do not have stature. Yeah.
I think it's okay to be, and as we've been, I mean, it's okay, I think, to be a little lighthearted, to, poke fun at yourself, poke fun of other things, and not be taking away from the reality of the situation. I think that's healthy to a degree. I think what happens is when people are just so stubborn, or speaking about some of your colleagues in the community, scientific community, it's been, so negative towards you, when people are just so, snobby, or what was the word we were using before?
That's it.
Yeah,
Arrogant. Yeah.
Or self-absorbed. But you have been wonderful. If you have not read the book from Professor Avi Loeb, did I pronounce your last name right?
Yes, you did.
Loeb. Extraterrestrial, the first sign of intelligent life beyond Earth. This is an incredible book. So 66,000 words, as you pointed out. So let's hope
for a photograph so that people will not need to read it in the future.
Yeah,
we would love that. And hopefully you'll come back and speak with us again, or visit us when you're in Los Angeles.
Of course, that was a great pleasure. I enjoyed it very much.
Also, if anyone has had an experience at home, feel free to message us.
Yes, let us know.
Like to
Drop us
know.
a comment.
Message Dana.
Message me. Oh, wait, I didn't ask you. Do you believe in aliens? And did you believe in aliens 10 years ago?
I believe in aliens. The single thing that the professor said, I agree with pretty much 100% of what he said. I can't follow all of the scientific explanation, just because I took elementary science 3 times and still never passed it. So, but what the thing that is so irrefutable in my mind is the concept of the arrogance to say we're the only ones here. There's nothing else out there. I mean, that borders on absurd. I think it's absurd to think that the only life form exists right here. It's just not logical. And I think you sum it up really well when you say there's a fear of the unknown. So if I can't explain it, if I can't prove it, then I'd rather it didn't exist. But if that was what our great leaders and thinkers did throughout time, man, we'd be in a really bad place. If you're not pissing someone off, then you're not doing a very good job. So I'm glad that you're pissing people off. And I hope the next time we speak, the first thing you say is how many more people are pissed at you. That means you really broke some ground and we got stuff to talk about.
I would be delighted to speak again with you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Professor.
you, Professor.
Thank you.
So nice meeting you.
Be well.
Bye.
Check out the book.
Bye.
We've got tons of more cool stuff coming up ahead. We'll get tattoos together sometime. You can get ET, and I'll get
you guys can just get the fingers.
Oh, the
ET fingers.
phone
Yeah.
home.
Oh,
One finger for each. That's
that
great.
would be so cool.
Aw.
Professor's like, gotta go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye.